Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. Hi. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I've got a bunch of your great questions today, and I'm going to answer them. So I'm going to take just a second here to let people log on, find the stream, and we're going to get started right away. While we wait and welcome everyone into the room, I will tell you a couple things about myself here. I'm Mary. I live in Bend, Oregon, and I have grown up as a professional athlete. The middle of three boys, and so I grew up skiing here. I grew up skiing here at Mount Bachelor in Bend, and I learned to ski when I was 8, and I did my first flip on skis when I was 12. So I've pretty much been kind of chasing these antics my whole life. And I learned to highline, which is a type of slacklining, very high off the ground, maybe 9 years ago now, and have been lucky enough to set American records twice, world record, and these are length. So I walk really, really long slack lines that are in excess of a mile. The longest slack line I've walked is 1.25 miles long. I was across an abandoned asbestos mine in a place called Asbestos, Quebec, Canada. So after that, I learned how to paraglide. I got into paragliding when I made this film called the Paraglide Rope Swing to Base Jump. So there's this French base jumper who lives in town here. His name is Super Frenchy. I've known him for a long time, and he and this late paraglide pilot named John Bam Bam Malmberg, who was a good friend of mine who passed away base jumping a couple years ago. They basically like tied this long rope with a handle on to a solo paraglider, and then Matthias in a tandem, they basically like flew the solo glider over and had the rope dangling down and flew the solo glider over so that the rope came onto the tandem, and Matthias grabbed a hold of the handle, and then they flew the gliders away from each other so the line was taut, and Matthias jumped out of the tandem and swung under the solo glider and then let go, flew fell like 1,000 feet before pulling his parachute. So that was the first time I'd ever even seen paragliding. And so the first paragliding flight I did was a tandem, and I had a $40,000 cinema camera in my hands as I filmed this crazy stunt. That was in October, and I think that early February of the following year, I went to the Oregon coast and I received free lessons from my friend Daniel Randall, who owns Fly Style Paragliding here in Oregon. And he was very generous. And it was by the spring I was teaching lessons. So I got into paragliding instantly. I was instantly hooked. And the moment that I was instantly hooked is actually people asked me what it is about paragliding that really like caught me. And there was a moment, I'd had a couple of flights from the dune here in Oregon. I had a couple flights from the dune where I went down, and I thought that was cool, but it was actually the moment that I launched a paraglider and it took me up. That was the moment that changed my life and set me on a trajectory of paragliding. So I've been paragliding for some almost 8 years now, I think, and I probably have between 1,500 and 2,000 flight hours. I've been lucky enough to paraglide in 15 countries on 5 continents and have trained acrobatics and cross country and have done a bit of base jumping and skydiving. And so all of these sports are very fun. And I know that my YouTube channel is pretty paraglide centric. And so some of you don't know that I actually walk slack lines professionally and I am a skier big time. So those things are fun. And um, I don't really fly speed wings. No, I actually learned to fly on speed wings, and I thought that what I wanted to do was fly speed wings. But like I said, speed wings go down, and I had spent a huge part of my life climbing big mountains to just go down really fast flying, but I flew down on my skis, jumping off cliffs and all kinds of stuff. And so when I launched a paraglider and it took me up, it was actually a speedwing. It was a Bobcat. It was a Gin Bobcat, 16.5 meter. The moment that it took me up, I was hooked. That changed my life. Um, so no, I don't really have any need to fly speedwings. And around here in Oregon, it's like there's nowhere that I can use a chairlift or shuttle to fly speedwings anyways, and so that's just a bit short-lived for me. And once now, I can fly 8 hours on my paraglider, 150 miles, so I think I'd rather do that. Um, how about paramotors? Those go up. I've never flown a paramotor. I'm afraid of having my finger chopped off, and it's just noisy, and so but, I this very morning, I was up very early today, and I was thinking to myself how nice it would be to be able to enjoy the morning light, the sunrise while paragliding, and I thought, that sounds pretty good. So maybe I will learn to fly paramotors at some point. And the question of do I fly tandems? Yes, I do fly tandems. I don't have a tandem rating, so kind of a rule breaker there. But yeah, I can fly tandem. I'm a really experienced and talented paraglide pilot if I'm patting myself on the back, and learning to fly tandem was a pretty easy transition. I also used to be a raft guide, and so directing people and telling them what to do and when to do it and what they should expect and the social dynamics is something I'm very comfortable with. So tandem is something I picked up pretty quickly and easily. Um, but let's get into these questions here. I have a number of great questions that were uh, sent in on my YouTube channel. So if you're not already a subscriber, you should be, so that you can see when I make a post that I'm going to do it and invite your questions. So I also want to let everyone know that I've started doing paraglide coaching calls. So basically, I did a coaching call with a man the other day who had had a big crash in May and had a fear injury and wasn't sure what his plan was for progressing in paragliding, how to get back into it, how to fly more safely, how to structure his learning in a way that was a bit more helpful, a bit more clear so that he could kind of see the path forward in paragliding. Like I said, I've been lucky enough to fly paragliders for a long time now and have a lot of experience doing a lot of different things, including acrobatics and cross country and all these different things. So I was able to help him understand where he was in paragliding right now, as well as where he might go, what kinds of things he might practice, what kinds of things he should be reading, should be thinking about, who he should be talking to, what kinds of things he should be doing in flight to practice, what kinds of kiting he should be doing, all these different kinds of things. So I want to offer that to you guys. If you are a patron, you'll know that I am offering that for free to my top tier patrons, but it's also something you can just do one-off thing. So you can email me at airyintheair@gmail.com and we can schedule a time to do a paragliding coaching call. And I've started to call it P4. I can give you a P4, which is a personalized paragliding progression plan, help you kind of see the road to competence and mastery in paragliding. Okay. I think that in paragliding in general, we like give people P2s and then we kind of set them off into the world without an idea of how to progress or what that looks like. And if you have a talented mentor who has gone on the path to becoming um, talented in paragliding and experienced, they might be able to guide you. But I think that solid mentorship seems to be the exception more than the rule. So I am happy to be offering my mentorship to people in paragliding through the internet, and the YouTube channel is my deepest connection to the community. So if that's something that interests you, please consider becoming a patron or email me at airyintheair@gmail.com. But a couple questions here. KC says, I do adventure therapy with adjudicated youth for a living, and I'm a huge believer in nature and adventure sports as a therapeutic tool. Wonder if you can talk again about paragliding as a tool. I heard you mention it as a path to enlightenment, essentially, but wondered more of your thoughts because it fascinated me. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I've talked a number of times as about paragliding as a tool for transformation, and I think that paragliding is absolutely a tool for transformation. It can be transformative in a number of ways. I think there's so many great metaphors in paragliding. Um, they can start with things like getting high off of the ground changes your physical perspective, and your physical perspective can be an amazing way for your mind to take on new perspectives in general. And but a tool, a cognitive tool, a tool for transformation is just like any other tool. It's something you have to use. It doesn't just use itself, you know? A robot is a robot, but a tool is something that you use. It's something that you put your attention onto. It's something that you have to kind of understand how it's used, what the job that it's designed for, and how you want to implement it. So I've made a lot of videos about that, and you can watch my videos. The philosophy of paragliding is one of them. E&B to E&C paraglider, why we step up on gliders, or I'm not sure what the title is, something like that, as well as before you kill yourself paragliding. Those are all videos that I've made that I've talked about the paragliding as a tool for personal transformation. But I want to use this question to talk about paragliding as a tool for healing. I think that in the with the idea of um, adjudicated youth or nature therapy at large, there's so many ways that that can be transformational, and I think one of the ways is that paragliding is extremely dangerous, and doing things that are extremely dangerous makes us consider our own mortality. It makes us realize that we could die, that the rocks are hard, and that we are soft, that we could splat on the fucking rocks, and as dark as that is something that calls our attention to something that's so real, which is that our time is limited on earth in these bodies. Bringing that kind of awareness and that kind of urgency into our lives is a wake up, right? Like the quote of, you have two lives, the one that you live and the one that you don't live. And the moment you realize that is when the second one starts. So we all have choices of who we want to be and what we want to put our attention to. And paragliding can be a wake up call. Paragliding is often, and I know that we've likely all seen this in our communities, paragliding can also be used as a distraction. It can distract us from what we should be doing. It can distract us from what we're feeling. It can be something that we just use as a way to get these like brain chemicals, these reward center chemicals, these drugs. And it's so powerful. It's definitely a hypernormal stimuli. We talk about hypernormal stimuli as things that our brain wasn't evolved to be able to handle, like pornography, social media, all of the foods that we now eat that are just incredibly sugar, fat, and salt rich. Paragliding is definitely like a hypernormal stimuli, right? Like it's the most incredible fucking thing you can do. So the chance that you can get addicted to the way that paragliding makes you feel is very real. Like it definitely is something that you can get addicted to, and you can find yourself on the treadmill where you need to take more risks, where you need to show off more, where you need to fly further, higher, longer, where you need to compare yourself to other pilots. And I think that's the most dangerous type of paragliding is comparagliding, where you're constantly comparing yourself to other people, other pilots, other people's experiences, where you're not taking time to reflect and integrate your experience into your life, where you're aiming for something that you'll never get. Because remember what Mark Twain said was that comparison is the thief of joy. Paragliding is something that can bring us such immense joy if we are able to shape ourselves in a way that we can contain it, that we can hold that joy. But otherwise, that joy will just run right through us and we will compare ourselves to other people and we'll just never get it. We'll never be able to hold it. Comparagliding. That's right. That's my fucking term. TM, trademark. So it's important to reflect on why we paraglide, what we're getting out of it, how we'd like to feel, how it makes us feel. And those are all things that will help us be safer pilots and also get more out of our paragliding, just like that that we can actually hold the way that it can possibly make us feel. The amount of joy, growth, surreal experience that paragliding has to offer, we actually have to shape ourselves in a way so that we can receive that from paragliding. Otherwise, it just goes right through us. It just goes right through us. And we don't want that, right? Like, then you just find yourself like constantly jerking off to this hypernormal stimuli, this pornographic sport that is paragliding, instead of actually like making love to life. So, yeah. I mean, you really want to be like eating pussy properly in paragliding and like putting in your time and serving people and giving back to the community and like being grateful for your experience as opposed to just like trying to spasm, if you know what I mean. Okay. I know that most of my followers are men, and so I think that's a relevant metaphor. um, so yeah, okay, let's get into some of these questions here. Let's get into some of these questions. Okay, so this is a good question. It's from Extreme Stunts and Extreme Stunts. What's your actual name, Extreme Stunts? You just type it into the chat. But the question is, how do you fly actively and how do you prevent collapses? And this is a really good question from Will. Thanks, Will. How do you fly actively and how do you prevent collapses? Okay, so the just the traditional idea of active flying is where you are naturally responding to the texture of the air through the tension of your brake lines. That means that when you sit in your harness, you just let the weight of your arms hang on the brakes, and then as the glider flies through the texture of the air, the pressure inside of the glider will change, which will change the pressure on the brake line. Since your arms are just already hanging on the brakes slightly, your arm will just naturally pull the brake down, increasing the angle of attack, increasing the pressure inside of the glider. And so, as the glider flies through all of this different texture and changes its internal pressure, then your body naturally responds to it. Okay. This is the quintessential act of piloting. The quintessential prevention of collapses is increasing the angle of attack so that the angle of attack never gets so steep that the glider collapses. Okay. But how do we do that? Well, if you've been actively piloting for a while, you'll know that your arms just naturally do it. So it is something that your body learns, and it is like muscle memory that your body just kind of gets used to, and it just happens. How do you prevent collapses at trim speed? Is with the brakes that you pull as much brake as you need to keep the angle of attack from being so steep that the glider collapses. Um, on speed bar, we use the rear risers. Now we have these new uh, BC connections on a lot of the E and C gliders, and it's trickling down into the E and B gliders that now you can control the angle of attack while on speed bar by pulling on the rear risers. And the rear risers, now you can think of that exactly the same way as the brakes, except the way that you use the brakes in active piloting is hanging your weight on them and then pulling more as you need is exactly the same on the rear risers when you're on speed bar. So you're pulling a little bit of tension on the rear risers on the speed bar just so that you can feel, but you're not actually like pulling a bunch of angle of attack. And as the texture of the air, as the glider flies through different textures air, you can feel that through the rear risers. Your arms naturally respond to it. And then you're also adding active input when you know you need it. And that is gleaned through experience, essentially. Um, so, how do you prevent collapses? You manage the angle of attack. How do you manage the angle of attack? Through the brakes and then through the rear risers when you're on speed bar. Um, that comes with time and comes with experience. And typically, there's a good, like in the cross country world and in the competition world, if you're still taking collapses on the glider that you're on, pushing speed bar, then it's not time to move up. So if you're flying a lot across country on an E and B and pushing full speed and you're not taking whacks and you're catching things really actively and you're keeping it from collapsing, then it might be time. If you want, you could probably move up to an ENC. Same thing on an ENC. If you're flying with a lot of speed bar, but you're taking big whacks, you're a little bit behind the glider, then it's probably time to just stay with the glider or step down and just keep working up the hours, right? Okay. I'm reading Dave's question. Are there any aha moments you've had during your progression that made you think, so this is what being an advanced level pilot is like? I have, yeah, I have had that. I was just in, I did the national championship series here in America, and I was competing in Chelan, and I was with the lead gaggle on a task, and I was with Donizetti, who's a world record holder, and Revis, and some really talented pilots. And we went on this 18-kilometer long drag race, full speed to the finish line, and I ended up fourth that day. So yeah, that was one of those moments where I was like, fuck yeah, crushing it. I ended up getting 10th in the country this year, so which is surprising and amazing. So that's that was an aha moment. Also, like I've had those moments in acrobatics where I linked, Misty to heli on my fourth try or something, and I was like, okay, like it feels good to like think about something and try it and be successful doing it. So, um, yeah, thank you. The next question here. You know who I am. No, I don't know who you are. Why don't you write your name here so I can address you? But your question is there a separate place that that reports some of the wing's glide ratios? Um, Rick, I will just tell you right now that glide ratio is I almost want to say glide ratio is a myth. Like glide ratio is a fucking myth, man. Like the air, if you are gliding, the air is just so much more powerful than the glide. Like the glide just doesn't fucking matter. Like all the gliders are nearly the same in glide ratio, but it's just the air that you're flying in is so incredibly powerful of a factor that affects your glide ratio so much. So it's like if I'm on my Xeno and I'm gliding next to an E and B and we're going downwind and I'm flying trim speed, like the glide is nearly the same. When we start pushing into the wind, in turbulence, that's where the glide ratio changes and the ground speed changes a lot. But for the most part, who cares about the glide ratio? Just get what you get and fly the fuck out of it. Like just maximize flying what you got. Don't compare it to other gliders. You don't need to compare your glider to other people's gliders. Just use them in the air as a source of information to tell you what's happening in the air, not tell you whether or not you're on a slow glider or you suck or you're an idiot or all of these things. Very closely monitor what your inner dialogue is when you're paragliding. Um, and don't just be aware when you hear yourself say, "Oh, you're falling behind. Oh, you suck. Oh, they're better than you. Oh, blah blah blah." There's just like so many things that go through your head, and um, it's unhelpful to compare yourself to other people when you're flying because you just don't know what air they're in. You just don't. I mean, if you're on an E and B and dude's on an Enzo, then you're like, okay, yeah, great. Like dude's flying an Enzo. Yeah, it's got way better glide than my glider, but that's just pretty much all you need to know. Hope that helps, Rick. Um, so may get our next question here. Next question comes from Dave Schmaus. He says, "Do I need a pod harness for XC?" I love this question. The answer is without a doubt no. You definitely don't need a pod harness for XC. All you need for XC is a paraglider and a harness. Um, Things that will help you fly XC are a Vario. That's an audible vertical vertical speed indicator. The beeps. It's helpful to have the beeps. It's also helpful to have an instrument that's could be as simple as your cell phone. On if you're running iOS, that's Fly Sky High. If you're running Android, that is XC Track. Those are very helpful. So it helps to have a flight deck for those things. So if you're flying a open harness, you might want to consider getting a flight deck that has like a little compartment. Sometimes it's a front mount reserve compartment. Other times it's just a compartment that you can put your stuff in. But that allows your flight computer to be somewhere you can see it. But I flew my first 100K in my acro harness with only the beeps. Okay, so don't ever think that you need more equipment to progress because the people who are talented cross country pilots can fly it pretty well with just the beeps. The beeps are pretty much something that you can't totally do without, especially when you get really high off the ground. You need the beeps, but just the beeps is all you need, man. Like if you got your open harness and your glider and the beeps, fucking let it rip. Okay, that's a great question though. Thanks for asking that. Robert, who's been a longtime follower of mine, who I really appreciate, he is asking about what kind of checklist I have before an XC flight, including where I gather my weather and wind info. So a couple things here. I want to make a video about like my big cross country kit and like everything that I have inside of my kit, all of the different foods and all of the different backup things like my headlamp and my knife and my repair kit for my glider. all these different things, like how I determine what I'm going to wear based on the forecast. Like, do I need a puffy coat or 3 coats? Am I going to fly with gloves or without gloves? Is it going to be super warm or am I going to freeze my ass off? There's all these different things that you need to consider. I use so many different wind things. It's just sickening, honestly. Forecasting's fucking it's just so much information that sometimes paralyzes me. So at this point, I try to not do too much of it. Um, XC Skies is kind of the gold standard in paragliding for forecasting. It is a paid subscription that gives so many different map models and different pieces of forecast, including buoyancy to shear, including estimated top of lift, uh, average thermal speed, all kinds of different things. So XC Skies, I would say, is like one of the best. If you're in America, there's also the Windgram, which is like, how would I describe? The Windgram is like the cartoon forecast. So it's like, it's very primitive and it's not super accurate, but it is a really nice way to just look and just have a really cool visual map of the day. So that's Windgrams. And I think that's WX to Fly is the name of the site, but it's a pilot that makes them, and they're not created for every site. So there's a way you can like email the guy and ask him to make one for your site. So that's a cool way to do it as well. But I also use like the National Weather Forecast or the National Weather Services surface wind speed thing. That's kind of like what I've just like used for 8 years for my local site. So that's pretty, I know that to be, no, I wouldn't say it's accurate, but it's like I know how to like interpret it. Okay, I hope that's helpful, Robert. Um, the next question is from Alex B. How do you set up your ultralight pod harness? Do you do it at home and do you have any special devices? What to watch out for? How many iterations? Any suggestions on what to do if you don't have a place to hang? Okay. Anytime you're setting up a pod harness, it's really important that you hang in it. And when you hang in it, like I'm talking like an hour, like it's like an evening. If I'm setting up a new harness, like I spend like a whole evening hanging out with my buddies because we have a way that we can hang it inside the house in the living room. And I just fucking hang out in the thing. I fits with all the different adjustments. I find all the different ways that the harness can move and adjust, and I make sure that they're right. The other thing that I think is of critical import if you're trying to adjust your harness is your speed bar adjustment. The best way to adjust your speed bar is actually by connecting your glider to your harness and hanging your harness from your A's. Usually what I do is I'll take a little loop of paragliding line and uh, I'll take maybe you know, a loop or a string this long, and I'll tie it into a loop, and then I'll thread that loop through my A riser Malon, like the quick link, and I'll hang my harness from the A's. That way, when I push the speed bar, it actually does show me how much my speed bar is working and if I can get pulleys over pulleys, full speed, and that kind of thing. So that's a special device that I would say you need. And any ideas for adjusting it if you don't have a place to hang? I would say, first of all, no, it's really important that you hang and you kind of just need to hang. Otherwise, if you're on launch and you're in a pinch, what you can do is you can just kind of sit on the ground in your harness and push out the pod to kind of like get a rough length of how that pod length is going to be. And you can also hold your A risers up with your hands or get your buddies to hold your A risers up with your hands so that you can test how the speed bar is working. I hope that helps, Alex. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, Jober asks what tips he has for someone experiencing their first times flying in some more bumpy conditions. I would say build up to it slowly. Fly, if you're like flying in the evening when the wind is smooth, then you can like fly a little bit earlier and a little bit earlier. Those kinds of things. So take it bit by bit. Um, Dustin Frank says that I mentioned the other day about having a climb screen and a glide screen on my flight computer. Can I elaborate? Yeah, so I use an iPhone, and so I run a program called Fly Sky High. You can use Fly Sky High on iPhone, and if you run Android, you'll use XC Track. Both of these programs allow you to set up multiple screens. And like Jerry Man is saying, yeah, like if you do it has an automatic mode that if you do a 360, it will turn to its climb screen. And my climb screen has my thermal centering. It also has, it's like the map is much more zoomed in. It also has a couple different climb rates. One is instant and one is averaged for me. That's just how I have it set up. Um, and then when you fly straight for a while, it switches back to the glide screen. It also, the phone has what's called gesturing, meaning that you can basically pass your hand over the camera and it will switch screens. So if you want the screen that you're not on, you can just gesture it and it'll switch screens. You don't have to take off your glove or anything. Okay, I hope that helps. Graham. Max. Max is asking, how do you weight shift while thermaling in turbulences in terms of active flying? Okay, so basically what I'm doing when I am thermaling is I do the active flying with the brakes and my weight shift nearly gets locked on. So Kelly Farina, in his book Mastering Paragliding, says that the proper weight shift when you're thermaling is equivalent to when you lean over and your head is in line with the risers. Okay. When your head's in line with the risers, that's about the amount of weight shift that you want to put on. And you pretty much want to lock that weight shift on. When big things happen and I get bucked around, I try to like stay on that weight shift. If something drastic happens and I need to center my weight or I need outside weight shift, I'll do that. But in general, I lock on my weight shift. I'm pulling inside brake as I need it. And then most of the active piloting in thermaling is with the outside brake. Okay. So as you take your next thermaling flight, lock on that weight shift with your head in line with the riser. Pull as much inside brake as you need to make the glider turn at the radius that you're trying. And then the active piloting is going to come with that outside brake. Hope that's helpful, Max. Christopher Albright asks, he flies PPG and he's been getting into motor thermally. Is there a transition class in the US to get into a P2 rating for paragliding? If you're an experienced PPG pilot and you start kiting your glider a lot, I would say that you can damn near show up to an instructor with the skills that you need to be able to fly, pretty much. But how would I say this? Yeah, I would, Christopher, I would say that if you are an experienced pilot and you do a lot of kiting, you can look at Andre Bondara's, what's the name of his website? It's like kitingchallenge.org or something. And start doing some of those exercises, then you could show up to a paragliding instructor, let him know your situation, and he'd probably give you a discount because you're going to be a really easy student. Hopefully that's helpful. Let me know where you are in the country and I can recommend someone to you maybe. Yeah, Cobra launching and swoop landing, like probably flying pretty good. So let me know where you are and I can recommend you to an instructor in your area. So Well, Christopher, why don't you email me at airyintheair@gmail.com and we can discuss. So the next okay, next question here comes from Sergey. And he says, this is a never ending question for comp flying. You're flying on full bar, 80%. How to distinguish two situations. One, turbulence or lift where you can still control the wing with the C risers without releasing the bar, or an upcoming collapse where you are supposed to release the bar immediately to prevent this. Can I speak on that subject? Ooh, this is a good question. Okay, so to iterate his question, how do you know that you should stay on the bar and control the pitch with the rear risers, or you need to be coming off the bar right fucking now to keep it from collapsing? Um, how do you know when you can stay on the bar and control it with the rear risers, and or if you need to come off the bar immediately to prevent the collapse? Okay, this is what I would say. On a two-liner, you can control everything with the rear risers. On a three-liner, if you have a BC connection, you can definitely do a lot with the rear risers. What I would say is that this is how I would describe this for you. This is how I would describe this for you. Imagine you're pushing full speed bar. Okay. You fly into turbulence. The first thing you do is you pull down the rears. If you need more and more and more and more, you keep pulling and keep pulling and keep pulling. If you get to the end of your extension, now you need to start letting off of the speed bar because that's the next thing that you can do. For the most part, you want to stay on the speed bar when you can stay on the speed bar. And if you need more than you can reasonably pull with just your hands, or if it's a really huge something that needs to be managed, say you slack the A's. If the glider is trying to be collapsed by the air, it will slack the A's first, and you can pull the rear risers to keep it. And you might need to let off the speed bar at the same time. Sometimes there's just wax so big that you need to let off the bar and pull as much as you can all at once. But in general, I would say that you start with rear riser control, and if you need more than that, you come off the speed bar. I hope that's helpful. Does that make sense? The next question. This is from Mateo, and he says, "What about doing my first stalls solo? I already did three big 360s and wingovers solo." Well, in general, I don't think it's a great idea. If you did it over water with a life jacket and a rescue boat that was watching you, then sure, go for it. But usually that situation of being over water with a life jacket and a rescue boat who's like pinned on you is a situation that you come by through having an instructor. So if you could set that up for yourself, then let it rip. If you're doing things on your own, I recommend that you be able to visualize it in your mind as well as verbally explain to another person exactly how to do it. That kind of sets you up to know that you've kind of done the mental homework that comes with that. A full stall is a bit tricky because it's likely to behave in a way that you're not used to and can find itself into a configuration that you don't even recognize, um, and can be really dangerous. So it's not a great idea, but if you found yourself with life jacket over water and a rescue boat, then fucking let it rip, buddy. I also can't tell you how, because you say you already did 360s and wingovers solo, but I don't know if your 360s suck or your wingovers are tiny, like if you think you're doing wingovers, but like actually like you're just kind of doing some connected turns, then maybe you're not at the level that you think you are. So, how to know where you are in your progression is difficult, and it's something you might want to consider. Okay, the next question, I hope that's helpful. The next question is from Ashish, who is known for asking great questions. He says, "Can you talk about energy management? I've been practicing this to build speed before landing, but I feel it applies everywhere. Wing over timing, keeping smooth in a thermal, launching even." Okay, let me tell you. So, energy management. We've all seen the videos of like Kriegel coming in, like downwind, uphill, full speed bar, coming off, like stall, land, boop. This is energy management at its finest. We can also talk about energy management as just pitch control. Energy management and pitch control are really, it's kind of basic and advanced, right? So, keeping the glider over your head is of critical import to keep yourself flying efficiently. So, you're not pitching and diving all the time. Um, as far as using the speed bar to control your energy, yeah, you can active pilot with the speed bar, but we're doing less and less of that now that we're flying two liners and that we're flying on gliders that have a BC connection so that you can just use the rear risers instead of active piloting with the speed bar. Um, First, let's talk about it keeping smooth in a thermal. Keeping smooth in a thermal is absolutely energy management. Like I said, you lock on that weight shift, use that inside brake to make yourself do the radius that you want, and then use that outside brake to manage the energy, meaning that sometimes a strong piece of lift will rock you back. It will pitch the glider up, which as it comes forward, it's going to have a lot of energy, and you need to break that so that it stops right over your head and then let it go before it starts rocking back again. That's what keeps you flying efficiently and turning efficiently and carving. This is the carve of thermaling, and it's of critical import, and it's something that takes a lot of time to practice and learn. Um, as far as like wing over timing and energy management, you're gonna find out that like every glider like retains its energy a little bit differently. It has a different timing on wing overs, and these kinds of things. So I think that it's helpful to know how much energy is a lot of energy. So a good way to know that is to be able to spiral your glider like fully nose down. Um, which there's another question here that's kind of related to this. So I'm gonna skip to that. I hope that was helpful, Ashish. And the question that I'll tie in here is it's actually what's the best way to descend out of a cloud if spiraling is disorienting? How does the descent rate of big ears versus spirals compare? First of all, what's the best way to descend out of a cloud? Fucking don't let yourself go into a cloud. Like, don't let yourself go into a cloud. I've recently made a video about cloud suck and cloud flying 101. Don't let yourself go into a cloud. And there's a number of rules and suggestions that I make in that video to let you know how to avoid cloud suck and how to deal with it if you get into it, what to do if you go into the cloud accidentally. But in general, don't let yourself go into a cloud. That's the best way to descend out of a cloud is don't go in the fucking cloud. Spiraling is very disorienting. What's the best way to descend out of a cloud if spiraling is disorienting? Well, I would say it's a really deep tail slide. But how many of you are so comfortable with your tail slide that you can do it in your pod harness when you're in a really scary situation, when you're super high off the ground? Probably not a lot of you. So it's not really deep tail slide is not a great way to descend in an emergency situation. The second part of the question is how does the descent rate of big ears versus spiral compare? Holy shit. So My guess is that the average sink rate of your glider is 1.5 meters per second. And I would say that the average sink rate of your glider in big ears is 2.5 meters per second. Okay. Maybe if you pull really, really, really big ears, then maybe you get it to 3 meters a second, but probably not. A spiral can be in excess of 20 meters a second. Like you can go so fast in a spiral, and it can be like so many G's, and like it's crazy. So it's 10 times the descent rate, a deep spiral versus big ears. Just in general, that's what I'd say about that. Hopefully that's helpful, Marcus. Okay, next question. Could you imagine participating at the X Alps Fun sometimes? This is from Jonas. In an answer, fuck no. Absolutely not. I know these guys who fly in the X Alps. I'm close with Gavin McClurg, and the shit that these guys fly in is just idiotic. I would never do the X Alps. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Got a couple questions that just came up in the chat here. I'm going to answer a couple of these. Jose Mario. Bom dia. What do you think about the safety of two-liner paragliders, and do you know the LT1 paraglider of Seoul? This would be a C class two-liner. You know me, buddy. Of course, I know about the LT1. I've seen one in real life. I haven't flown it. I know the guy who owns it. He lives in San Diego. He's a very talented pilot, and he tells me that the thing flies great, but is spicy. And he's not convinced that it actually would certify in the C class, even if they had the collapse lines on it, which is interesting. But I think it's, the nature of the beast is that it's a lower aspect ratio two-liner, so you don't have the snakiness to deal with, and that the two-liner configuration allows you to really fly well on speed bar and control the glider while you're accelerated. So LT1, very exciting. It sounds like Flow is also developing something similar. And I think that in a couple of years, um, most manufacturers will have a C class two liner. As far as what I think about the safety of two liners, I think that two liners are safer for pilots who are ready to fly them. But not every pilot is ready to fly a two liner. They are less prone to collapse, but if they collapse, it's a much bigger deal. They're a lot faster, but they're harder to launch. They're more dangerous. They're harder to stall. They're harder to reset. So, for a lot of reasons, they're more difficult to handle. But if you are a very experienced pilot, and experience, I'm talking probably more than 600 flight hours. Um, if you have more than 600 flight hours, yeah, like a two liner is probably like sick. It's probably more safe. Hope that helps, Jose. Will's asking, what's the scariest SIV maneuver? Huh. I don't know. I think it depends on the person, but probably like a fully accelerated full frontal. A fully accelerated full frontal. Fuck that shit. I've taken a number of fully accelerated full frontals on accident, just like flying into big, huge lift, and had it just like Houdini my glider away from me. Um, but I've never done an SIV, to be totally honest with you. I've never done an SIV. I've never had any kind of instruction on radio. I have had a rescue boat and a life jacket on, but I have never done an SIV. I went straight into acrobatics, and so I kind of trained myself on that. And my experience as a professional skier and a professional athlete, I kind of was already versed in how to deal with really scary situations and how to deal with it when shit hit the fan. So I didn't do an SIV. Now I have, you know, now I've paraglided a lot and have done all kinds of things. Um, And then Alex B is asking a follow-up question to this on any suggestions on how to make SIVs less scary. Yeah, I do actually have an idea about this. And I've been meaning to make a video about my thoughts on SIV because I think that we kind of have a misconception about SIV that everyone has to do it and it's so important and maybe you don't actually have to do it. Maybe it's really super dangerous. SIV is dangerous because yeah, you're over water, that's dangerous. You're collapsing your glider, that's dangerous. You're stalling it, that's dangerous. All these things are dangerous. And just because you have an instructor there doesn't always make it, it doesn't mean that it's perfectly safe. How do you make SIVs less scary? Is I would say you do your homework. Talking with your SIV instructor before the thing so that you can know what kind of maneuvers he's expecting you to do will really allow you to do your homework on those maneuvers. If you're going to do full stalls, you can watch my video about all about stalls where I tell you exactly how to do your first full stall and you can bring that into your mind, you can visualize it, you can think about how you would do it. So I remember when I did my first full stall, I went to an SIV instructor and I told him I just wanted him to tow me up because I wanted to try my first full stalls. He said, "Well, tell me how you'll do your full stall." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to fly and I'm going to make sure I'm in the box, I'm in the right spot, and then I'm going to pull the brakes down and slow the glider down, and then 3, 2, 1, I'm going to stuff the glider down. It's going to rock way back and then I'm going to feel like I'm falling as I come under the glider. The glider is going to stabilize. I'm going to slowly lift my hands symmetrically until I'm in a stable tail slide. Once I'm in a stable tail slide, when the glider comes into the release window, which it means it's in front of me, I'm going to move my hands up, 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 up until finally I let the glider fly and it opens. So when I was able to tell the instructor, this is how I've thought about it. This is how I've practiced it. I'm also a professional skier who's learned new tricks in exactly the same way where I envision it. I can tell you how I'm thinking of it, what I think is important. And I go over that in my head over and over and over to really bring it into my body. He was like, "You're going to nail it." He towed me up and I crushed it. Okay. So that's how you make SIVs less scary. That's not just for full stall. You can imagine doing the same thing with spins. You can be like, okay, I'm going to slow the glider down and then I'm going to bury a brake and then the glider is going to go around and it's going to go around, keep going around. I'm going to keep the, the brake buried. Once the glider stabilizes overhead, I'm going to slowly let up and then the glider's going to fly. Okay. All these different ways you can kind of like work through this so that you can get yourself ready for this. Also, breath work. Great thing. Practice breathing through your nostrils, essentially. Yep. Practice breathing through your nostrils. So much of your nervous system is connected to your breathing. So if you're like, your heart's going to be, and you're going to be scared as fuck. Okay. So practicing your breathing. Next question is on speed to fly. Speed to fly. My second most recent video is on, the title of it is How Much Speed Bar? And that video is on speed to fly. Chris, I would recommend you check it out. But if your instrument gives, he's asking speed to fly and glide. If your instrument gives glide ratio, is it just a game of maximizing that number? Sure. I guess that's one way you could think of it. But if you just stare at that number, that's actually not the numeral that you actually want to be responding to. The response that, or the numeral, the number, the metric that you want to look at to maximize your glide is actually your vertical airspeed. So it's your lift or your sink, right? So if you're going up, you slow down. If you're going down, you speed up. If you're going down more than, let's call it 4 meters a second, full speed bar. If you're going up more than 2 meters a second, pull the brakes and turn in circles. It's kind of simple like that, but there's more nuance to it. I go super in depth on this. Chris, I'd recommend you check out my video, How Much Speed Bar? There's also another one way further back called All About Speed Bar that will kind of talk about these speed to fly concepts, what the graphs look like that of these relationships between your vertical airspeed and your vertical airspeed and your airspeed. Okay, Scott, I hope that's helpful. Scott is asking, let's talk descent techniques for those without good G tolerance. Okay. Let's talk descent techniques for those without good G tolerance. Okay, there's a number of descent techniques. There's only really one descent technique that will give you Gs. I guess there's two. There's wingovers and spirals. Okay, wingovers and spirals are the two descent techniques that provide a lot of Gs. So all of the other ones are good for those without a good G tolerance. Those include beeline stalls. You ever done a beeline stall? It's pretty fun. It's pretty interesting. That's where you take your beelines, you pull them down, and the glider just kind of like folds in half and becomes a parachute, and you're just kind of a stable parachute. Another good descent technique is called a horseshoe, where you grab your center A lines on both sides, your centermost A lines on both risers, you reach up, grab them, and pull them down. You can do it kind of slow because what it does is it makes the glider collapse right in the middle, and then it kind of comes together and it becomes a parachute, and you start descending like that. Those are both good descent techniques. Beeline stall and the horseshoe. That's a funny question. Okay, what else is a good descent technique? Scott, just to wrap this up, I think a great descent technique is as big of big ears as you can muster. When I say as big of big ears as you can muster, some people grab the big ear lines like this and they just pull them in. That'll make the wingtips collapse, but you can actually like pull it in like that, reach up the line again and pull a meter of that thing. So the initial big ear is like this, and then it's like it becomes a fucking big ass big ear. All right. You can do big ears. So practice how big of big ears can you actually make? Because the bigger the big ears, the more drag it's going to produce, and the smaller the glider is going to get. So you're going to increase your descent rate. Also, once you're in a full big ear configuration, push all of the speed bar that you got. That's a really good descent technique. Another one here, and this is pretty advanced. When you're pushing full speed, maybe you're on big ears or maybe you're not. When you push full speed, you can hold on to your rear risers and kind of yaw your harness sideways so that, especially if you're in a pod harness is like everything is in line, right? So you're like your legs and your fairing is very aerodynamic. And if you just turn yourself a little bit sideways so that your legs are now blowing in the wind and your fairing's blowing in the wind, it like produces a bunch of drag. It makes the angle of attack steeper and you go down more. This is the same concept as a drogue chute, like a G chute. So those, increasing the drag of the system in your harness makes the angle of attack go up and you go down faster. Hope that's helpful. Da-da-ba-ba-ba. Okay, Ricardo. Hi, Nino Airy. It's been a minute. Do you have any tips to get back into the flow after a long break from flying? Yeah, I do. I would say it's kiting, first of all. And then it's like flying at the beach, soaring, flying glass off, um, getting back into the community, picking up those friends again. Who did you used to fly with? Are they still flying? Getting reconnected to the community and your friends that you flew with. That's probably what I would recommend for getting back into the flow after a long break from flying. But Ricardo, if you'd like a personalized idea as to how you can reintegrate and progress in paragliding, feel free to email me. I am doing paragliding coaching calls. So if that's something you're interested, email me, airyintheair@gmail.com. Lucas asks, I'm a new pilot. Do you recommend me to purchase the Air Design Easy 2 E&A as my first wing? Sure, it's an E&A. It's modern. Go for it. Dave asks, if doing a stall in anger, do you bother trying to ease into the stall like in SIV, or do you just more or less bury the brakes and wait out the potential wild oscillations? Dave, is it actually anger? Is that a typo? If you're doing a stall in anger, or is it like in danger? I think maybe it's missing a D. Are you doing a stall in danger? Or are you doing a stall in anger? Rah! I love the idea of stalling in anger. That's a really good way to fucking get out your anger. Just stall it. Rah! Bury the brakes. Yeah, that sounds like a great way to stall in anger. I'm going to answer it though, as if you wrote, if doing a stall in danger, do you bother trying to ease into the stall like in an SIV, or do you just more or less bury the brakes and wait out the potential wild oscillations? Well, personally, in danger or like in an emergency situation, I actually try to stall the glider as little as possible, meaning that I'm going to take the glider into a deep stall configuration, hoping that the malfunction will clear in a deep stall because a deep stall is much easier to restart. And if I'm in the deep stall and the malfunction is not clearing, then I can pull more brake and come into a tail slide and then back into a deep stall before I release it. But in general, in an emergency situation, you want to do the stall that you're most comfortable with, the one that you've practiced the most. So if you, however you do them in SIV, if you habituate that and you get muscle memory going for that, then I would use that stall. Okay, hope that helps. And Jose also has another question. Can I talk about active control by rear risers in two-liner gliders? Yeah, I would say that when you're on speed on a two-liner, you can think of the rear risers exactly like the brakes. Literally, it's just like flying with the brakes, but it's on the rears. It's just like that. There's all kinds of little tricks that I do, like when I'm gonna push the speed bar, I push the speed bar and pull the rear risers at the same time so that the angle of attack actually stays the same as I activate the speed bar. And then I use the rear risers to let out to actually accelerate the glider. There's all kinds of tricks like that. But in general, a couple other things to think about when you're pulling on the rear risers, I try to pull the risers down towards the carabiners so that I actually am just changing the angle, the length of the lines, as opposed to pulling back away from the risers. That's just one thing that I do and I like. Chris is asking to follow up about the descent techniques. What about pulling asymmetric with a spiral? Well, an asymmetric spiral is a descent technique, but it actually doesn't have that great of a descent rate because when you're doing a really deep asymmetric spiral, you're actually going up and over the glider so that you have like, say that your lines are 10 meters long, you're going down, 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 and then you're going up 10, 20, 30 meters or something and coming back down. So it's like a wing over where you're actually going up so much in half of the maneuver that you're not actually descending that much. So, um, asymmetric spiral is definitely less disorienting than a um, normal spiral, so it's probably better, but still probably not the best descent technique. I like the stall, but I've also done 1,000 of them, so I like it. Okay, next question here. Ba-da-da-da-da. Okay, this is a good one. And this is from Danilo. Danilo says, "Hi, I am a paragliding student, and unfortunately, I am an introvert, and I have a difficulty to find a way to get in touch with other students and in general with the community of paragliders who can potentially help me to improve my skills once I finish the school. Is it possible to become a good pilot without flying with other pilots?" Okay, to start, is it possible to become a good pilot without flying with other pilots? No. No, it's not. You need to fly with other pilots. Also, to address what you said here, hi, I'm a paraglider student and unfortunately I'm an introvert. Why is it unfortunate? It's okay. You're perfectly fine just as you are. If you're an introvert, that's great. What I would say is that if you're an introvert, that doesn't make you antisocial, right? Like, I'm sure that as an introvert, you have friends. There are people that you communicate well with. There are people that you don't communicate well with. I would find people in the community that you communicate well with, that you can befriend. Sometimes, as an introvert, you might feel better paying someone to be your mentor. You might ask your instructor if you could extend your um, schooling through a P3, through a P4, so that you can continue to work with the instructor who has taught you. Um, you are a unique person and you will have proclivities and preferences, and you will get along with the people you get along with. And I would just say that you need to do the work and be patient with yourself to meet people so that you can find those people who you get along with. And that might include coming out of your comfort zone a little bit, but paragliding is something where you very much need the community. You need instructors, you need mentors. And I don't think it is, I mean, I think hypothetically it is possible to become a good pilot without flying with other pilots, but in general, no, you need other people's mentorship. You need to have this, you like, it's so dangerous to fly by yourself anyway. It's like, just find the people that you're comfortable with, maybe pay your instructor to continue your schooling through P3 or P4. Um, I hope that's helpful, Danilo. And then the last question that I have here submitted, which if you have any questions, feel free to be putting them into the chat below, because we're almost to the end of our questions here. This is from Doug. He says, I'm a self-taught pilot who has probably 100 hours on a B and 150 on a C. All of those hours are coastal flying, and I'm looking to branch out into mountain and cross-country flying. Would you recommend transitioning from purely coastal to more thermal flying? I definitely start on my B glider, by the way, Doug. Okay, Doug. First of all, would I recommend that you transition from coastal flying to more thermal flying? I don't think I would recommend that. I think that if that's something that's really calling to you, it's obviously more dangerous. Coastal soaring is some of the most safe paragliding we can do, and mountain thermal flying is some of the most dangerous we can do. So, do I recommend it? No. But if that's really calling to you, then there is a way to transition safely. I think that the way to transition safely is to find a mentor or an instructor. You can do, if you want to do that transition, mountain thermaling is something that is a type of paragliding that if you want to pursue that, you need to do an SIV. That's when you need to do an SIV, because you're going to fly in air that can collapse your glider and will collapse your glider. There's no experienced pilot who hasn't taken a collapse. Experienced mountain thermaling pilot who hasn't taken a collapse. We all take collapses. So knowing what that looks like and how to identify it, how to deal with it, is important. So that's one of the things that you are likely going to want to pursue if you're going to transition from coastal to mountain thermaling. Um, Stepping down onto your B glider is a great idea. That's sounds like you recognize how important that is. I think you're on the right track there. And then also, when you start learning to thermal, it's important that you just take it bit by bit, that you start thermaling. Your first couple thermaling flights are going to be in the morning when the thermals just start, and they're going to be light, and you're going to have extended sled rides. And then you're going to start launching later and later and later. I think that what's important here is that you have an instructor or a mentor. You can go to an XC clinic. Um, you could do the super clinic. There is at the Applegate Open here in Oregon every year in June. They have a XC Super Clinic with Carrie Castle as one of the instructors. I highly recommend that kind of format for you to begin your transition into mountain thermaling. And I hope that's helpful, Doug. Thanks for the question. Okay. Oh, Chris is clarifying his question. It's not an asymmetric spiral. He's talking about holding an asymmetric collapse while spiraling. You know, I think hypothetically that works fine. I just there's a couple things. One is that it's going to make the glider flap like a motherfucker, And I don't like my gliders to flap a lot because it seems like it's really hard on it, right? Also, the problem with spiraling, like say you have really big ears pulled in, if you're spiraling on that, you're basically like taking all of the load of the glider and you're putting it onto like a very small proportion of the lines. So I don't actually recommend that you do high energy things without the whole glider being open. So if you're gonna pull an ASIM and hold it, maybe like little weight shift, like if you have big ears pulled in, it's fine to do just like small weight shift wing overs to increase your descent rate, but you don't want to like go big and have a bunch of energy because you don't have that many lines up there and it's going to stretch out your lines or it's going to stress the glider a little bit too much. So um, I don't necessarily recommend that. There's other descent techniques that I think work better for that. I hope that's helpful, Chris. Will has another question. Have I thrown my reserve? Answer, yes. I have thrown my reserve. I was training acrobatics here over the dirt at Pine Mountain and did a helicopter. And the day before I had done a helicopter and I'd screwed it up. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm in a helicopter and it's getting off axis, it's getting a bit messy, and I kind of panic and I basically stall the outside wing quickly. The inertia that my body and my harness has twists the lines. So now my glider is stalled, but I'm in a line twist. And the first day, I was just patient and I was patient and the glider stabilized and then I just untwisted and then it came out just fine. And the following day, I had the same exact configuration. I thought that maybe I could speed up how quickly I was going to get out of the rotation. And so I let up on the brakes a little bit. I was on a freestyle glider, a freestyle 3 by Gradient, 22 meter. And the glider just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 line twists and it started to spiral. I threw my reserve. Immediately, the glider came around and caught the reserve. I thought to myself, oh, fuck, I'm really dead now. So I looked down at my second reserve. The moment that I put my hands on my second reserve, the first reserve came out of the lines, exploded open. But now it was like tangled in the risers. So the parachute was trying to come out of my back but now it was stuck in the risers. So it was holding my head down and I couldn't fucking see it. And I had a hard time pulling in the glider. It was a fucking mess. But I landed in the sage and I was totally fine. I stuffed the parachute into the back of my harness. I kited my glider up the hill. I launched off and flew down to my truck. Repacked the shit and flew the next day. So parachutes work. Definitely know how to pack them in there. Learn how to pack it, learn how it works so that you feel comfortable throwing it because there's going to be a moment in your paragliding life, maybe, that you'll need it and you want to trust it so you don't hesitate to throw it. Okay. Good question, Will. And Louis says that he just broke his spine in Switzerland in a paragliding crash. And I'm really sorry to hear that, Louis. And do I feel a difference between ENA and ENB in terms of safety and performance? Yeah, of course, there's a difference in safety and performance. That's why they have a rating. Um, the Bs have more performance and slightly less safety, and the As have less performance and slightly more safety. It's pretty simple, but there's not a huge difference between A and a low B. I'll say that. There's not a huge difference. The low Bs these days are really incredibly safe. So that's basically my input on that. Um, whoo, guys, thank you so much for being here. That's all my questions. Um, like I said, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. That's patreon.com. Patreon.com/Ari in the air. Maybe that didn't do it. HTTPS colon backslash www. Can't type. I want this to be in the chat here so that you guys can have it accessible. Maybe that works. Yeah, that second one worked. Okay, so I am offering paragliding coaching if you've had an accident that you want to debrief, if you want to create a personalized paragliding progression plan. I call that a P4. with me, I'm happy to do that with you. You can email me at airyintheair@gmail.com, or you can find my Patreon page, and top tier subscribers get that for free, as well as a Airy in the Air buff. You get an Airy in the Air buff, whichever one you want. Here, this one's got flying stuff on it, which my favorite one is the, where is it? Where is it? It's the, there it is. It's the alien saucer sucking up the paraglider. Love that. And then this one is a cool paraglider over the mountain, highliner between the peaks, and then a ski track down. You can barely see the ski track, but at any rate, would love to help you guys out, progress, become safer pilots, have more meaning, have a longer career, get more out of your paragliding career. I'm happy to help you do that. So check out my Patreon, email me at airyintheair@gmail.com. Also, if you need any gear, I sell a bunch of gear. So yeah, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.